Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. I'm Jenny Harper, your go-to gal for spinning old-school American folktales, wild crime stories, and a little bit of everything else. Pull up a chair for today's yarn, it's a doozy. We're heading back to the late 1600s, right around the time the colonies were still figuring themselves out. Out in Boone County, Tennessee, about 20 miles west of the nearest trading post, you'll find this sleepy little spot called Willow Creek. Rumor has it the settlers here came from the bloodline of some wandering medicine man who rolled into these parts way back when. Folks say he hailed from the early pioneer days. Just past the town sign, there's a dirt path winding up to Hawk Ridge, a big OL mountain stretching 3,000 feet into the sky. Up there on Hawk Ridge, there's a place they call Doc's Hollow, a cave tucked into the cliffs. This fella, Doc Jeremiah Cole, was a backwoods healer who drifted down from the Virginia hills. Story goes, he holed up in that cave, mixing remedies and picking wild herbs, saving folks from the grave and stitching up the locals when they got banged up. The people of Willow Creek never forgot him, so they named their little town after the guy, well kinda. They settled on Willow Creek, but everyone knows it's Doc Cole's legacy. Now, in Willow Creek, there was this woman everybody called Joy. She earned that nickname, 'cause she had a downright magical touch with flowers. Didn't matter what kind, roses, daisies, you name it, if you handed Joy a seed or a sprout, she'd turn it into something special. Come next spring, you'd see whole fields bursting with color, like a painting come to life. Her green thumb didn't just pretty up the place. Those bare, rocky hillsides turned into a sight to behold, and the folks in town started making a decent buck selling her blooms. Pretty soon, every face in Willow Creek had a smile plastered on it, like it was a permanent festival. That's why they dubbed her Joy. Truth is, nobody knew her real name. She wasn't born and raised in the hollow like most folks. She just showed up one day, a few years back, out of the blue. People still talk about that night. It was a real gully washer, thunder cracking loud enough to wake the dead. Joy was found sprawled out on the muddy road leading into town, soaked to the bone after lying there all night in the storm. When old man Caleb, one of the locals, stumbled across her at dawn, she was beat up bad, cuts and bruises all over. The good-hearted folks of Willow Creek didn't hesitate. They took her in, patched her up, and nursed her back to health. Took about a month or so before she was up and moving again. Naturally, everybody was curious about this mystery woman who'd washed up at their doorstep. What was her name? Where'd she come from? But Joy, she didn't say a peep. Wouldn't talk to anyone, wouldn't even hint at her past. Her clothes didn't give much away either, just tattered rags that could have belonged to anybody. Nobody could figure her out, but one thing stood out. She loved flowers. Never said a word to a soul, mind you, but if she spotted a pretty blossom in somebody's yard, she'd shuffle over, quiet as a mouse, and ask if she could have it, or at least the seeds. Folks didn't mind, those flowers were just sitting there, not doing much for anybody. If she wanted 'em, she could have 'em. Joy ended up settling in with Miss Ellie Tate, an old widow lady with a heart of gold. Ellie lived in a rickety little cabin on the edge of town. Nice enough, but she didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. Truth be told, most folks in Willow Creek were scraping by back then. It wasn't just Ellie's place that was rough. The whole town could have been called a hard luck patch of dirt. But Joy? She wasn't one to take kindness for granted. To pay Ellie back, and to thank the townsfolk for saving her hide, she got to work. That quiet woman started gathering up every flower seed she could get her hands on and headed for the hills. Before long, those empty slopes around Willow Creek were covered in blooms, wildflowers, marigolds, you name it. What used to be a dusty, barren stretch turned into a downright paradise. Then Joy took it a step further. She hauled those flowers to the market down in the county seat and sold them for a pretty penny. She came back with a pouch full of silver coins and handed it over to Ellie, then passed out the rest to the folks who'd helped her out. Flower money, she called it, in one of the few times anybody heard her speak. She told the townspeople they ought to pitch in and grow flowers together, make it a group effort. So under Joy's lead, the people of Willow Creek rolled up their sleeves and got planting. Little by little, the cash started trickling in. Life got better. Folks weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving. They couldn't thank Joy enough for it. Pretty soon, Joy wasn't just a nickname, it was what everybody called her, from the old-timers to the kids running around barefoot. Nobody cared what her real name was anymore. To them, she was the treasure they'd found half dead in the mud, now leading them to a better life. She was family. Even the little ones playing by the creek would holler Joy when they saw her coming, and she'd just smile, bigger and brighter than she ever did when she first showed up. With things looking up, the townsfolk started dreaming bigger. They figured they'd fix up Doc's Hollow, that cave up on Hawk Ridge where old Jeremiah Cole used to work his magic. Maybe if they spruced it up, they could offer some prayers and flowers to the spirit of the healer, asking him to keep watching over them. So they pooled their pennies and sent Mason Luke Fletcher up the mountain. Luke was the best stonemason in Boone County, and after a month of sweat and grit, he turned that run-down cave into something special, solid and grand, not the crumbling mess it used to be. Once Mason Luke Fletcher finished fixing up Doc's Hollow, it wasn't enough to just leave it pretty. The folks in Willow Creek wanted to do it right, bring up flowers and offerings to honor old Doc Jeremiah Cole's spirit. Everybody agreed Joy deserved the first crack at it. She was the one who turned their fortunes around, after all. So come offering day, Joy teamed up with Luke and hiked up Hawk Ridge to the cave. She carried a basket of fresh blooms, vivid reds and yellows she'd grown herself, and stuck him in a clay vase she'd borrowed from Ellie's kitchen. They set everything up real respectful-like, said a few quiet words of thanks, and started heading back down the trail. But Mother Nature had other plans. The sky, clear as a bell all morning, turned sour fast. A drizzle kicked up, then thickened into a steady rain. Joy and Luke didn't have so much as a tree to duck under, just open trail and slick mud. They trudged along, boots squishing, trying to keep their footing on the steep path. Then it happened. Joy's foot slipped on a wet rock, and down she went hard. She let out a yelp, sharp and sudden, clutching her leg. Luke scrambled over, asking if she was okay, but when he brushed her ankle, she hollered loud enough to echo off the ridge. He backed off quick, not wanting to make it worse. No way was she walking down like that, so Luke hoisted her up, piggyback style, and carried her the rest of the way to Ellie Tate's cabin. Once they got there, Luke fetched Doc Miller from town, a gruff old sawbones who knew his trade. He took one look at Joy's leg, poked around a bit, over her protests, and shook his head. Fractured, he said, rigging up a splint with some wood and cloth. Gotta keep off it for a good 3 months, or that leg's gonna be useless. Rest up, girl. After he left, Ellie looked at Joy with sorry eyes. Joy, honey, I hate to say it, but my grandkid's coming to stay tomorrow, little Tommy, all of 3 years old. I can barely keep up with him as it is, and with you laid up, I'm worried I can't look after you both. Luke, still hovering nearby, piped up. Joy, I ain't much for fancy words, but if you don't mind, you could stay at my place. Ma passed a few years back, sisters married off, and I got an extra room just sitting empty. Only thing is, folks might talk, you know how tongues wag around here. Joy sized him up, saw the honest streak in him, and nodded. Under Luke's care, she healed up faster than anybody expected. Wasn't long before she could hobble out to her flower patches on a crutch, checking on her blooms with that same quiet focus. Word got around town, of course. Joy living with Luke set the gossip mill churning. Pretty soon, folks were nudging him with sly grins, asking when the wedding bells were gonna ring. Luke'd just wave him off, red-faced. Quit your yammering, he'd say. She's just healing up, that's all. I'm helping out a friend, don't go ruining her good name with your nonsense. Even with all his grumbling, Luke couldn't deny something was brewing between him and Joy while she stayed at his place. He was just a rough-around-the-edges stonemason, parents long gone, no big prospects to his name. Deep down, he figured no woman would give him a second look, especially not someone like Joy, who'd turned half the county into a flower garden. He kept those feelings buried, scared to death of making a fool of himself if he ever let him slip. Time passed, and Joy's leg mended up good as new. Ellie's grandson was still bunking at her place though, so Joy didn't feel right crowding back in. She didn't have a home of her own in Willow Creek, never did being an outsider, so she turned to Luke one day and asked, real quiet, mind if I stay on a bit longer? Luke tried to play it cool, muttering a quick sure, no trouble, but inside, his heart was doing cartwheels. One afternoon, they were out tending the flower fields behind Hawk Ridge. Joy was watering her blooms, and Luke, with no masonry jobs lined up, pitched in to help. The sun was blazing at first, but then clouds rolled in thick and heavy. No rain yet, just a damp, earthy smell hanging in the air. Joy paused, glanced at the sky, and tugged up her left sleeve a bit, lost in thought. Luke caught her muttering under her breath, something about still being there and needing to settle down proper. He stood up, brushing dirt off his hands, and said, Joy, looks like a storm's coming. Wanna head back and finish up tomorrow. Joy turned to him, a funny little smile creeping across her face, and out of nowhere, she started reciting some old poem, soft and sweet, like she was testing the waters. Caught him in the lamplight's glow, searching high and low, and there he was all along. Luke blinked, scratching his head. What's that you're saying, Joy? Sorry, I'm a plain OL fella, ain't much for poetry. She grinned wider, eyes twinkling, and hit him with it straight. Luke, you ever think about getting hitched? What did you say to me being your wife? Would you have me? Luke's jaw dropped so fast you'd think it'd hit the dirt. He couldn't believe his ears, figured he'd misheard or she'd gone loopy from the heat. Joy, you serious? He stammered, but before he could get another word out, a bolt of lightning cracked the sky wide open. Thunder boomed like a warning shot, and Luke clammed up, grabbing her hand. Let's get out of here before we're fried, talk later. By the time they stumbled back to his cabin, they were soaked through, looking like a couple of drowned rats. Luke hustled to the stove, whipped up some hot ginger tea, and handed her a mug. Drink up, don't catch cold, he said, hoping she'd drop the whole wife talk like it never happened. But Joy wasn't one to let things slide. She sipped her tea, set the mug down, and fixed him with that same steady look. So Luke, you didn't answer me out there. What about it, me as your wife? You gonna say yes or what? Luke sputtered, caught off guard again. Joy, I like you alright? More'n I oughta admit. But I'm just a dirt poor mason, rough as a cob. You'd be hitching yourself to a nobody, and folks'd laugh you out of town. Let's just pretend you didn't say it, huh? Get some rest. He bolted for his room, muttering about work in the morning, leaving Joy sitting there alone with her tea. Luke didn't sleep a wink that night. By dawn, he grabbed his toolbox and hightailed it out of the cabin before Joy could corner him again. For days, he didn't even come home, crashed instead at his buddy Jake's place on the other side of Willow Creek. Jake's table was a mess of empty whiskey bottles Luke had drained, drowning out the mess in his head. Jake finally had enough and prodded him one night. Man, what's eating you? You've been holed up here drinking like a fish. What happened? Another pal, Tom, chimed in with a smirk. Bet it's that Joy gal. She turned you down, and now you're crying in your liquor. The guys started ribbing him, tossing guesses back and forth, until Luke snapped. Lay off, all right? Ain't nothing going on. I just miss my ma, that's all. Been thinking about her lately, and it's got me down. Don't drag Joy into this. He waved them off, but the whiskey was hitting hard. His eyes got fuzzy, and for a second, he swore he saw Joy walk right through Jake's door and plop down across from him. He rubbed his face, mumbling, "Too much hooch, seeing things now." But then she spoke, clear as day, and he froze. It wasn't a hallucination. Joy was really there. Luke, it started back when I was staying with Ellie, she said, her voice shaking. Then I broke my leg, and Ellie couldn't manage, so I moved in with you. And one night, when I wasn't looking, you took advantage of me. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. Luke's head spun. This wasn't true, not a lick of it. But before he could get a word out, Jake and Tom jumped all over him. You low-down dog. Jake barked. Dodging her all this time, 'cause you couldn't face what you did? Ruining a good woman like that. Luke flailed his hands, desperate. No, listen, it ain't like that. She's. But they cut him off, turning to Joy. Don't you worry, Joy, Tom said. We'll round up the town elders and sort this out. You'll get justice. Sure enough, they dragged in some of Willow Creek's graybeards, old farmers and shopkeepers with stern faces. Joy told her story again, tears and all, and the elders laid into Luke like a pack of wolves. How could you do this, son? One growled. Ain't right, shaming her like that. Luke tried to explain, his eyes pleading with Joy to come clean, but she wouldn't meet his gaze. The elders weren't done. You owe her, Luke. She's the one who brought this town prosperity. Can't let her be an outcast cause of you. Make it right. Joy piped up then, wiping her eyes. Elders, my honor's been tarnished. If he'll marry me and take responsibility, I'll let it go. Otherwise, how am I supposed to live with this? I'm already staying at his place, just needs a proper wedding to square things up. The old men nodded, liking the sound of that. 3 days from now, they declared. We'll throw a wedding for the whole town to see. Folks cleared out after that, leaving Luke and Joy to walk home together. Luke half laughed, half groaned as he looked at her. "Joy, you're a dang mess, pulling a stunt like that." She sidled up to him, resting her head on his shoulder with a mischievous grin. "So Luke, now you've got no choice. Wanna make me your wife or not?" Luke sighed, finally letting his guard down. "All right, you win. I'll treat you right, I swear it." After the wedding, they settled into a happy rhythm, Luke working his masonry gigs, and when he was free, helping Joy tend her flower fields. One day, Joy got back to the cabin just as Ellie Tate showed up at the door. Ellie had a favor to ask. "Joy hon, it's my turn this month to head up to Doc's Hollow and swap out the offerings, fresh flowers and such," she said. "But these old bones ain't made for mountain trails no more. Would you and Luke mind going up for me?" Ellie had taken Joy in when she had nothing, so there was no way she'd say no. "Course we will," Joy replied with a smile. As Ellie shuffled off, she added with a wink, "You two've been hitched a while now, time to think about a little one. Folks say Doc's Hollow's a lucky spot for that kind of wish. Might come back with good news." Joy blushed and ducked her head, waving Ellie goodbye. A few days later, Luke wrapped up a job and came home, and Joy told him about the trip. They set out for Hawk Ridge together, Joy toting a bundle of flowers and, oddly enough, a coil of rope. Luke raised an eyebrow. "What's the rope for? Planning to lasso me some supper up there?" Joy chuckled. "Nah, the trail's rough, might come in handy." As they hiked, Joy's mind wandered back to that muddy path where she'd busted her leg years ago. If she hadn't slipped that day, she wouldn't have ended up with Luke. Funny how life works out. Some things, she reckoned, were meant to be, and you gotta hold tight when they come along. They reached Doc's Hollow, and Luke said, "Go on in, darlin'. I'll fetch some water from the spring nearby. Been a while since we tidied this place up." They split up, Joy stepping into the cave while Luke wandered off. But the second she crossed the threshold, something felt off. A rotten stench hit her nose, sharp and nasty, like something dead had been festering in there. Her skin prickled, a chill running down her spine. Last time they'd come, it hadn't been like this. No smell, no bad vibes. Now it was like the cave was a hungry beast, jaws open wide, ready to swallow her whole. She pushed deeper inside, squinting in the dim light. Her heart sank. The wooden carving of Doc Jeremiah Cole that usually sat in the corner? Gone. The flowers they'd left last time? Not a wilted petal in sight, not even the vase was there. Sure, the blooms could have dried up, but to vanish completely? No way the townsfolk would have taken him. Everybody pitched in to keep this place sacred. It's a haul to get up here, too. Nobody from outside Willow Creek would bother. So who'd messed with it? Joy stood there, puzzling it over, the offering bundle still in her hands, when wham, a sharp crack hit the back of her head. She spun around just in time to see a figure in a hooded coat, face shadowed, before her vision blurred. She knew that face, recognized it from somewhere, but before she could call out, everything went black. When Joy came to, her head was throbbing, and she was deeper in the cave than she'd ever been. The air was thick and musty, shadows dancing on the walls from a flickering torch. That hooded figure stood over her, peeling back the hood to reveal a weathered face framed by tangled hair. "Well, hey there, little sister," the man said, his voice low and rough. "Been a long time. Sorry about the knock, I had to get you in here quick." Joy blinked, her mind racing. She knew him, Jake Colton, an old friend from a life she'd left behind. "Jake, what's this about?" she snapped, rubbing her head. "I don't owe you nothing anymore. I'm done talking, just let me go home." He held up a hand. "Hold on, hear me out. Your big sister, Lily, she knows you're here. We gotta move." Joy's eyes narrowed. "Lily? After all these years, she's still hung up on me? You and her turned your backs on me, I don't need your sob story." She started to stand, but Jake grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not rough. "Things ain't that simple, Joy. You're no ordinary gal, you're tied to something bigger." Turns out, Joy wasn't just some drifter who washed up in Willow Creek. Her real name was Marigold Joybloom, and she'd been born into a secret clan of herbalists up in the Smoky Mountains. Folks called them the Green Kin. She had a knack for flowers, 'cause she was one of their flower keepers, Marigold, named for the golden blooms she could coax from any soil. Her sister, Lily Bloom, was another keeper, tied to lilies pure and white. Jake Colton? He was the son of the clan's medicine chief, trained in the old ways of roots and remedies. The three of them, Marigold, Lily, and Jake, grew up tight as siblings in the kin's hidden valley. Jake and Marigold fell hard for each other, promising to tie the knot someday, while Lily was just their tag-along kid sister. But Lily had her own crush on Jake, and when the medicine chief picked Marigold as his son's bride, things got messy. The night before the wedding, Jake got plastered with some buddies, stumbled into the wrong cabin, and woke up next to Lily. By morning, he swore he'd marry her instead, leaving Marigold high and dry. Heartbroken, Marigold tore up her wedding dress and ran off to her flower patch to cry it out. That's when Mama Rose, the clan's wise woman, and Marigold and Lily's ma, found her. "Sweet girl," Mama Rose said, "I know you're hurting. Don't hate your sister, she's caught up in this too. Jake didn't mean it, but he's made his bed. He betrayed me." Marigold shot back. "Swore we'd be together, then shamed me the day before our wedding. I ain't forgiving him, or her. But I won't curse him either, Mama. You raised me better." Mama Rose nodded, pressing two objects into her hands, a leather pouch called the bloom bag and a braided cord she called the soul rope. "Keep these safe, child," she said. "Trouble's coming to the green kin, and you'll need 'em. Something big's brewing." Marigold didn't get it, but she tucked the gifts away, wiped her tears, and steeled herself to face the wedding guests. Marigold pulled herself together and marched out to the Green Kin's gathering hall, ready to play the good daughter despite the ache in her chest. The wedding guests were already milling around, sipping moonshine and chattering, when she stepped in. They smiled and nodded her way, but she could feel their eyes, everyone wondering why the bride-to-be wasn't in her dress, why she was greeting folks like nothing was wrong. Nobody dared ask though, not on a day like that. They just waited to see what had happened next. Soon enough, Jake and Lily strutted out, him in his best shirt, her in a borrowed white dress that should have been Marigold's. The crowd went quiet, jaws dropping as they pieced it together. The wedding went on anyway, stiff and awkward, with Jake and Lily sealing it over a cup of shared cider. But the second they drank, the ground under the valley shook hard, like the earth itself was spitting mad. Jake grabbed Marigold's arm in the chaos, muttering something about fixing this. Next thing she knew, he'd worked some old kin trick, sapped her flower-keeping powers right out of her, and she blacked out. When she woke up, she was battered and soaked, lying in the mud at Willow Creek's edge, miles from home. Her spirit was broken, her past stripped away, but the folks of Willow Creek took her in, and that's where she'd been ever since, building a new life as Joy. Now, here was Jake years later, staring her down in Doc's Hollow. She gave him a cold laugh. "You took everything from me, Jake. My gifts, my home, gone cause of you. What, you here to finish me off now?" "Nah, Marigold, Joy, whatever you go by," he said, shaking his head. "I messed up bad, I know. But I had reasons. You're hitched now, ain't you? I can't feel that old spark in you anymore, your flower mark's faded." Joy frowned, glancing at her arm where a faint marigold tattoo used to glow under her skin. "Lily's got a lantern, a soul chaser she calls it," Jake went on. "She's tracked you down. I had to beat her here." "What's that got to do with me?" Joy shot back. "You ruined me, sent me packing to this world. Why should I care?" "It was the only way to save you, and the kin," Jake said, his voice tight. "Lily's gone dark, practicing stuff she shouldn't. That lantern's just the start. She's coming for you, and she won't stop. You gotta trust me." Before Joy could answer, a low, creepy laugh echoed through the cave, bouncing off the stone walls. "She's here," Jake whispered, eyes wide. "We're out of time." Joy grabbed his sleeve. "You owe me the whole story, Jake. Let's go together." But then Lily stepped out of the shadows, and Joy's blood ran cold. Her sister wasn't the girl she remembered. Her face was pale green, veins bulging like roots under her skin, eyes black as coal. She looked like something out of a nightmare. "Well, well," Lily hissed, her voice dripping venom. "Thought you could hide forever, little sister? Time's up." Joy stared at Lily, her sister's twisted grin sending a shiver down her spine. She knew right off that Lily was past saving. Whatever dark tricks she'd been messing with had eaten her up inside. "Lily, you're a goner," Joy said, keeping her voice steady. "I can see it, those black eyes, that poison in you. You've been dabbling in the wrong stuff, haven't you?" Lily cackled, the sound rattling the cave. Smart as ever, Marigold. Yeah, I cracked open the Rose Codex, figured out how to bend the earth to my will. And you're gonna hand over that bloom bag, or I'll bury you both right here. Joy's hand brushed the leather pouch at her side, the bloom bag Mama Rose had given her all those years back. She'd studied it in quiet moments at Luke's cabin, piecing together its secrets. It was a keeper's relic, tied to the Greenkin's power, able to heal the land or bring it back to life. But it had a twin, the Rose Codex, a dangerous book that could twist nature into ruin if it fell into the wrong hands. Put them together, and they'd wipe everything clean, turn the world to dust and start over. Only way to dodge that kind of mess was the soul rope, the braided cord she'd hauled up the mountain. Lily took a step closer, pulling a snake-shaped stone from her coat. Sky to ash, earth to nothing, she chanted, her voice rising. With my blood I call the void, let it all burn. A blinding light split the cave floor, and a glowing rift sucked Joy in like a whirlpool. When her eyes adjusted, Lily was right in her face, smirking. You think marrying some dirt kicker and losing your mark would hide you? Pathetic. Give me the bloom bag, I'll be the queen of the green. Joy yanked a small hand mirror from her sleeve and shoved it at Lily's face. Look at yourself, Lil. You're a monster, greed's turned you rotten. See it. Lily flinched, catching her reflection, those black eyes, that sickly skin, and lost it. No. You're lying, she screeched, lunging with a rusty blade aimed at Joy's chest. Joy dodged, but the move threw her off balance. The cave spun, and suddenly she wasn't in Doc's Hollow anymore. She was back in the Greenkin Valley, standing in her old marigold field. Lily was there too, young again, twirling with butterflies, while Jake strolled up with a basket of snacks. The three of them laughed and ate under the sun, like the bad blood had never happened. Lily held out a biscuit. Last one, sis, better nab it before Jake does. Joy reached for it, but the scene flickered, shifted to that awful wedding morning. Jake woke up beside Lily, arguing, then slapping her when she wouldn't back down. You played me, he yelled. Lily smirked, cold as ice. Half your power's mine now, lover boy. Cross me, and I'll torch this whole valley, or Marigold. Your pick. Joy's heart twisted, she'd gotten it all wrong. Jake hadn't betrayed her out of spite, he'd caved to save her. Jake, she shouted, reaching for him, but he faded away. Joy's vision snapped again. She was in another memory, watching Jake with Mama Rose back in the Greenkin Valley. He clutched the bloom bag and soul rope, his face grim. Mama, you gotta get these to Marigold, he said. Lily's out for blood, she won't listen to me. She's too far gone, but Marigold's sharp, she'll figure it out. The valley's doomed if we don't act. Mama Rose sighed, heavy with worry. I'll have to strip her powers to keep her safe. Lily'd track her otherwise. I'll send her to that old healer's spot, Doc Cole's land. It's got a shield from the old days, she'll be okay there for a while. Jake nodded, handing over the relics. I'm sorry it's come to this. Joy's chest tightened, she'd blamed him wrong all this time. Then the scene dissolved, and she was back at the wedding, watching Jake and Lily drink that cursed cider. No, she yelled, lunging to stop it, but a voice cut through, Luke's voice. Joy, watch out. She blinked, and she was in Doc's Hollow again, Lily's blade flashing toward her. Before it could strike, Jake dove in front, taking the hit square in the chest. Blood bloomed across his shirt as he gasped, Go get out. Use the rope. Luke grabbed Joy's arm, hauling her toward the cave mouth while she fumbled for the soul rope. She glanced back. Jake was slumped against the wall, fumbling with something at his side. The bloom bag was gone from her waist. Jake must have snatched it. He was planning to end it, take Lily down with him. Joy and Luke reached the entrance just as a low rumble shook the cave. She yanked the soul rope from her bundle, looping it around her and Luke's waists fast as her hands could move. A deafening boom erupted behind them, rocks crashing, dust billowing. The cave was caving in, swallowing Jake and Lily whole. Then, like a miracle, the air cleared. Birds chirped outside, sunlight spilled in, and a figure stepped through the haze, an old man in a weathered coat, looking eerily like the missing carving of Doc Jeremiah Cole. Joy dropped to her knees. Are you Doc Cole? Please, save Jake and Lily. She wasn't always like this, she was good once. The man smiled, kind but distant.
I'm Jeremiah Cole. All right.
Your heart's in the right place, girl. I'll give you a blessing for it. He waved a hand, and the cave stilled, no more shaking, no more ruin. Then he opened his palm, revealing a sprig of horse mint and a white lily flower. With a flick, they turned into two glowing pills, shimmering like starlight. Take these home, he said. Swallow 'em, and you'll get a fresh start with those two. Fate's got a way of looping back. He faded into a wooden statue again, standing where the old one used to be. Joy and Luke cleaned up Doc's hollow best they could, then stumbled home, dazed. That night, they each downed one of the pills. A year later, Joy gave birth to twins, a boy, Luke Mint Fletcher, and a girl, Lily May Fletcher. Mint for the horse Mint Jake loved, May for the lilies Lily once tended. Every time Joy looked at him, she saw Jake and Lily reborn, and she swore she'd raise him right this time. Life in Willow Creek settled into something sweet after that. Joy and Luke raised Mint and Lily May with all the love they had, teaching him the value of a good heart. One day the twins, maybe 5 or 6, were strolling down Main Street with Joy when they spotted a scrappy little kid, a beggar boy, swiping a bun from a cart. The vendor caught him and started wailing on him, fists flying. Lily May didn't hesitate. She marched right over, handed the kid her own biscuit, and pulled a handkerchief from her pocket to dab the blood off his face. Ma and Pa always say we gotta be kind, she said, serious as could be. Beggars ain't got homes, they're hurting. We ought to help 'em ourselves. Mint grinned, ruffling the boy's hair. Come on, buddy, you're staying with us tonight. Joy watched her kids, tears pricking her eyes. She'd done right by Jake and Lily's second chance. They were growing up good and true. Mint had Jake's big heart, always looking out for others, and Lily May had her aunt's spark, tempered with a gentleness Lily never got to keep. The old Lily had gone astray, but fate gave her a do-over, and Joy figured that was the universe's way of balancing the scales. For the good folks, Joy thought, we gotta spread their light. And for the ones who stumble, we give 'em a shot to turn it around. That's how the world gets better, step by step, like flowers blooming in the wild. She smiled at me through the screen. So what you think, y'all? This tale's all about passing down the good stuff. Kindness, grit, second chances. Ain't about superstition or hocus pocus, just old-fashioned American heart. Thanks for listening. Jenny Harper leaned back in her chair. That's the end of story 1, folks. Stick around, 'cause next up, I've got another doozy for you. It's a folk tale called 10 Years Watching My Sister Break, Back to Break a Rich Man's Leg. Picture this, colonial times, down by the bustling Chesapeake canals, where merchants and money rule the roost. 30 miles south, there's a little place called Mason's Bend, small, maybe 30 families, scraping by on fertile land. One family's got a son and daughter, tight as can be, but when a greedy bigwig sets his sights on the girl, everything goes sideways. You won't want to miss it, I reckon it'll hook you from the jump. See you next time. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Jenny Harper here, ready to spin you another wild American folktale full of heart, grit, and a little payback. Today's story takes us to the 1700s, down along the Chesapeake Bay where the canals were buzzing with trade. Ships loaded with goods, tobacco, timber, you name it, chugged up and down, making merchants fat and happy. About 30 miles south of all that hustle, tucked along the water's edge, was a little speck of a place called Mason's Bend. Wasn't much to it, 30-odd families, a handful of cabins, and some rich, loamy soil that kept them fed. Most folks there were farmers or weavers, working the land or looms, living simple but tough. In Mason's Bend, there was this one family, the Carters, who had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, thick as thieves since they were knee-high. The boy, Jack Carter, was built like his name, solid as a jack oak, broad shoulders and a steady hand. His sister, Sarah Carter, was a slip of a thing, delicate but pretty as a picture. Folks in 10 miles called her the Belle of the Bend. Time rolled on, 5 years or so, and those Carter kids only got better with age. Jack grew into a strapping young fella, and Sarah bloomed into a real beauty, long hair, bright eyes, the kind of grace that turned heads. But that beauty caught the wrong kind of attention. Up in the canal town nearby, there was a big shot merchant named Amos Reed, pushing 40, flush with cash from his shipping deals, and mean as a snake. Amos had a reputation, used his money to bully folks, charm women, and leave a trail of trouble. One day, word trickled up to him about this stunner down in Mason's Bend. Sarah Carter, they said, looked like an angel dropped from heaven. Amos couldn't get her out of his head. Night after night he stewed on it, plotting how to get his hands on her, that greedy gleam growing in his eye. Amos Reed wasn't the type to let a notion simmer too long. He was a man of action, and not the good kind. One crisp fall day, he saddled up with a couple of his roughneck hired hands and rode into the canal town, strutting down the main drag like he owned it. He passed by one of his own businesses, a silk mill he'd bankrolled, and saw the workers hustling, faces red from the heat. Then he swung by his pawn shop, where folks were trading their last scraps for a few coins. He watched a desperate father pawn his kid's winter coat just to eat, and instead of pity, Amos got an idea, a nasty, crooked one. A sly grin crept across his face as the plan took root. 2 weeks later, Jack Carter's pa, Tom Carter, was up in town running errands. He'd hitched the family wagon and was chatting with a neighbor when one of Amos's cronies sidled up, flashing a deck of cards. "Fancy a quick game, Tom?" the fella asked, all friendly-like. Tom wasn't much for gambling, but the neighbor egged him on, and before he knew it, he was in deep at a backroom table. In less than an hour, Tom's pockets were empty, every cent he'd brought gone. The neighbor, in on the fix, nudged him again. "Borrow a bit from Amos's boys. $20'll get you back in the game." $20 was half a year's earnings for the Carters, but Tom, flushed and stubborn, took the bait. By sundown he'd lost that too, plus a promissory note handing over the family's 5 acres of prime farmland to cover the debt. Tom staggered home, a broken man, his head spinning with shame. Amos didn't waste time. A few days later, he showed up at the Carter place with his muscle, a smug grin plastered on his face, ready to claim the land. Tom begged. Those 5 acres were all they had, their lifeline, but Amos just laughed. "Tell you what, Tom," he said, leaning in close. "Heard you got a real pretty daughter, Sarah, right? Let her be my 4th wife, and I'll tear up this deed. Fair trade, huh?" Tom recoiled, horrified. "She's barely 18, too young for you. Ain't right, Amos." But Amos wasn't asking. He shoved a contract under Tom's nose, forced his shaking hand to sign it, and sauntered off, leaving Tom alone in the dark, sobbing into his calloused palms. By noon the next day, Sarah and Jack trudged home from the fields with their ma, Ellen Carter, after a long morning tending crops. They found Tom slumped in the front room, staring at the floor like a ghost. Sarah rushed over, kneeling beside him. "Pa, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft with worry. Ellen hovered close, hands on her hips. "Tom, talk to us. What happened?" Tom dragged himself to a chair, head in his hands, and let out a ragged sigh. He spilled it all, how he'd gotten roped into cards, lost their money, then the land, and signed that cursed deal with Amos Reed. When he got to the part about Sarah, Ellen's face went white, then red-hot mad. She slapped Tom across the shoulder, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You gave our girl to that snake?" she yelled. "Sarah, pack your things. Quick. You're going to your Aunt Bessie's down south, till this blows over." Jack stepped up, fists clenched. "I'll take her, Ma. Gotta keep her safe." The 2 siblings threw some clothes in a sack, planning to slip out under cover of night. But Amos wasn't dumb. He'd left a lookout posted near the Carter place, and every move they made got back to him fast. As the sun dipped low, Sarah and Jack hit the road, picking their way along a bumpy trail by the canal. They'd barely reached a fork in the path when shadows moved ahead, for burly thugs stepped out, with Amos right behind him, his belly jiggling as he laughed. Well, look who's running," he sneered. "Where you off to, sweetheart?" Before they could bolt, 2 of the goons tackled Jack, pinning him face down in the dirt. He thrashed, but they were too strong. The other 2 grabbed Sarah, dragging her kicking and screaming right in front of Amos. Jack could only watch helpless, as Amos and his crew took turns roughing her up, right there in the open, her cries cutting through the dusk. When they finally let go, Sarah crumpled to the ground, bruised and shaking. Jack just sat there, staring blank, like his mind had shut off. Sarah, fighting her own pain, crawled over and pulled him into her arms, whispering, "It's okay, Jack, we're alive." She hauled him to his feet, and they limped home, broken but breathing. Back at the cabin, Ellen took one look at her kids, Sarah's torn dress, Jack's empty eyes, and knew. She wailed, clutching them both, but with Amos holding the deed, they couldn't fight back, not yet. The next day, Jack still hadn't spoken, locked in a daze. The Carters couldn't even think about justice. They had to fix him first. The Carters kept Jack close, hoping he'd snap out of it, but he stayed silent, eyes hollow like he'd seen the devil himself. One afternoon, a grizzled old traveler, an ex-preacher named Brother Amos, no relation to the merchant, knocked on their door, asking for a cup of water. He took one look at Jack, sitting slack in a corner, and pulled Tom aside. "That boy's got a heart sickness," he said, voice low. "Seen it before, guilt and hurt eating him up. You need a real healer, not just time." Brother Amos tipped his hat toward a small chapel 10 miles up the road, run by a wise old pastor folks called Reverend Clay. "Take him there," he advised. "Might be his only shot." Tom and Sarah didn't waste a day. They hitched Jack up in the wagon, his body limp as a rag doll, and rattled off to the chapel. Reverend Clay met him at the door, a tall, wiry man with a white beard and eyes that saw too much. He studied Jack a minute, then turned to Sarah. "He watched you suffer, didn't he? Couldn't stop it, and now he's blaming himself. That's what's locked him up inside." Sarah nodded, choking back tears as the memory hit her again. Reverend Clay went on, calm but firm. "To pull him out, he's got to let go of who he was that night, find himself again. I'll make a paper stand-in, a little Jack if you will. We'll burn it, let him say goodbye to the broken piece, and call him back." Sarah half understood, but she trusted the man. Reverend Clay cut a crude figure from some old parchment, lit a candle, and had Sarah whisper to Jack while the flame licked the edges. "Jack, you ain't that boy no more," she said soft. "First words you hear after this, they're your new name. Come back to me." The paper curled to ash, and Sarah pushed open the chapel door, tears streaming as she called after him, "I'll wait for you, little brother. Find yourself and come home." Jack stumbled out into the dusk, moving south like a sleepwalker, no word or glance back. He wandered past travelers on the road, none stopping to chat, till he hit a quiet stretch of farmland. There, a scruffy fella in a wide-brimmed hat, smelling of cheap whiskey, crossed his path and grinned. "Well, howdy, stranger. Fate's got us meeting today. What's your name?" Jack's head jerked up, those first words breaking through the fog. Sarah said, "My name's what I hear first.
Guess I'm Howdy."
The man laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Can't call you that, son. Sounds like a greeting, not a man. Tell you what, I'll name you Slate, clean and strong, like a fresh start. I'm Preacher Jim, by the way. Stick with me if you ain't got nowhere else." Slate nodded at Preacher Jim, still shaky but feeling a spark he hadn't in weeks. Jim wasn't your average drifter. He was a rough-and-tumble vigilante, a man who'd made it his mission to right wrongs wherever he roamed. He'd picked up some serious fighting skills along the way too, moves he'd learned from dock brawlers and backwoods scrappers. Slate tagged along, and Preacher Jim took him under his wing like a stray pup. Over the months, Slate saw Jim in action, taking down a crooked tax collector who'd starved a widow's kids, or busting up a gang of bandits single-handed, fists flying like a tornado. Under Jim's gruff teaching, Slate's spirit hardened up. The quiet, broken boy faded, and a man started taking shape, tough, sharp, and alive again. Preacher Jim didn't just give him a name, he gave him a purpose. Slate soaked up every lesson, learning to throw a punch, wield a staff, and outthink troublemakers. Pretty soon, he was outshining his mentor, faster and fiercer than Jim ever dreamed. One day, they rode into a dusty hamlet to help a poor family cheated out of their harvest by a slick landowner. It was a trap though, hired thugs jumped him from the shadows. Jim took a bad hit, a blade to the gut, and Slate had to fight tooth and nail to drag him out alive. They holed up in a cave they'd used before, Jim bleeding out on the rocky floor. "Slate," Jim rasped, his face pale as death. "I ain't making it this time. Been a straight shooter my whole life. Getting you as my shadow in my later years? That's enough for me." Slate's eyes burned, tears cutting through the dirt on his face. Jim gripped his hand.
"No regrets, kid.
Just keep it up. Fight for what's right, you hear? Make the world fair where it ain't." With that, Preacher Jim slipped away, leaving Slate alone with his grief and a new fire in his gut. A few weeks later, Slate rolled back into the canal town near Mason's Bend, picking up odd jobs to eat. Word came through the tavern grapevine. Somebody needed a heavy hitter for a tough gig. The target? A notorious river pirate who'd robbed and killed his way up the Chesapeake. Problem was, the pirate had a bodyguard, a wiry white-haired fella who moved like a ghost and fought like a demon. Slate took the job, figuring he'd use his brains as much as his brawn. He set up a fruit stand on the pirate's usual route, playing the simple vendor. Every day, the old bodyguard stopped by, buying an apple, eyeing Slate like he knew something was up. Slate waited for his moment, patient as a hawk. Slate kept his fruit stand running smooth, slinging apples and keeping his eyes peeled. He'd gotten the pirate's routine down pat. Every day, the old bodyguard would grab his apple, then escort the big man past the stand, all swagger and steel. Slate had a plan: wait for a quiet moment, slip a blade between the pirate's ribs, and vanish before the bodyguard could blink. One morning the stars aligned. The street was near empty, the pirate strutting close, and Slate's hand twitched toward the knife under his counter. But right then, a woman stumbled in, reeking of gin and wobbling on her feet. She was a sight, red dress clinging tight, long legs flashing under the hem, hair spilling wild like she'd just rolled out of a barroom brawl. Her eyes were big and glassy, lips curved in a sloppy flirty smile that could melt a man's resolve. Slate froze, caught off guard by her stumbling charm. She was trouble wrapped in velvet, and he couldn't look away. She snatched an apple, took a messy bite, and sashayed off with a giggle, leaving him staring after her. The pirate slipped by, untouched, and Slate cursed under his breath. His shot was gone. Next day, he steeled himself to try again, resetting the trap. But there she was, back like a bad penny, swaying up to his stand with a coy, "Forgot to pay you for that apple yesterday, sugar." She tossed him a coin, lingered a minute, and something clicked. They started talking. Over the next few weeks, they got chummy. Her name was Ruby, she said, and she was stuck in this rotten town, dreaming of breaking free. "Get me out of here, Slate," she begged one night, voice soft and desperate. He nodded. He'd do it, soon as this job was done. But when the day came to strike, Ruby showed up again, hanging off the bodyguard's arm like a prize. Slate's gut sank. He'd been played. The old man smirked, tipping his hat. Ruby wasn't some lost soul. She was the bodyguard's bait, sent to sniff him out. They'd seen through his act from the jump. Slate didn't even try the hit after that. He packed up his stand, slipped out of town under the moon, and left the pirate breathing for now. He needed to clear his head, shake off Ruby's spell, so he pointed his boot south, back toward Mason's Bend. Years had passed, decades even, and the place was a ghost of itself. The cabins were crumbling, the fields overgrown, and the Carter homestead was just a pile of rotted wood. Slate stood there, letting it sink in, then trudged to Reverend Clay's chapel. He knelt by the altar, pressed his palms to the floor and whispered, "I'm Jack Carter again, not Slate no more." The weight of his old name settled back on him, heavy with purpose. Jack Carter didn't linger long at the chapel. He had unfinished business. He hitched a ride into the canal town, where Amos Reed still lorded over the place, fatter and richer than ever. Jack spotted him lounging outside his silk mill, barking orders at workers, looking like nothing could touch him. All those years boiled up in Jack's chest, Sarah's screams, his pa's shame, the family torn apart. He strung his bow, an old hunting piece he'd kept sharp, and knocked an arrow, aiming for Amos's heart. His hands shook, not from fear but from the weight of it, finally facing the man who'd wrecked them. But as his finger tensed on the string, something stopped him cold. He saw it clear. Amos started this mess, sure, but Jack's own choices after, running off, leaving Sarah and his folks to fend for themselves, had piled on the ruin. He'd chased justice all this time, but lost his family doing it. Now they were gone, and he couldn't even track him down to make it right. If he loosed that arrow, he'd get revenge, but he'd bury the man he'd become, the Slate who fought for good, not just blood. At the last second, Jack shifted his aim. The arrow flew, fast and true, and sank deep into Amos's leg instead. The big man hit the ground howling, clutching his thigh as blood soaked his fancy breeches. Jack dropped the bow, turned, and walked away, leaving Amos alive but humbled. He headed back to where the pirate job had fizzled, drawn by some gut pull he couldn't shake. Word was the river pirate had finally caught a bullet from another bounty hunter, but the old bodyguard, Ruby's keeper, was still kicking around. Jack found him waiting by the docks, gray hair whipping in the wind, a quiet grin on his face. "Knew you'd circle back, boy," the man said, voice like gravel. "Ain't met a soul who can match me in a fair fight. Let's dance." Jack glanced at Ruby, hovering nearby, her eyes unreadable. He gave a slow nod, and the two squared off, fists up, no weapons, just raw skill. They went at it hard, trading blows like thunderclaps, but Jack's years with Preacher Jim paid off. He landed a haymaker that dropped the old man clean, sprawled out cold on the planks. Jack stood over him, panting, but didn't finish it. Heroes don't kill for sport. The bodyguard groaned, alive, and Ruby just watched, silent. Jack Carter walked off that dock a free man. No more Slate, no more Jack, just a drifter with a clear conscience. From then on, folks whispered about a lone wanderer along the Chesapeake, a fella who'd robbed the greedy to feed the poor, always gone before you could thank him. Jack Carter's days as a drifter took on a rhythm after that dockside fight. He'd roamed the Chesapeake backroads, a shadow in a worn coat, picking pockets of fat cat merchants and slipping coins to widows and orphans. Word spread, a Robin Hood type, they said, born from Mason's Ben's ashes. But it wasn't glory he was after, it was peace. Those two big turns, watching Sarah break and breaking Amos's leg, had carved him into something new. Preacher Jim's lessons, Reverend Clay's ritual, Ruby's betrayal, they'd all hammered him into Slate, then back to Jack, and now into this nameless wanderer. He'd learned the world's hard edges, how to dodge its traps, and how to keep his soul intact. One night, under a starry sky by the canal, Jack sat on a log, whittling a stick, and thought it over. Life flips fast. Meet the right person, hit the wrong moment, and you're on a new trail, bright or dark. Most folks don't get those big shifts, just plod along till the end. He'd chosen the rocky path, teetered on the edge of an abyss, and come out the other side. Who's to say what's down there, till you look? People change, he figured, like caterpillars into butterflies, or moths fading in the dark. Some grow wise, some tough, some just blind to the danger till it's too late. Jack wasn't blind no more. He'd bared his weak spots once, got burned, and learned to guard them. Now he felt steady, not hollow, a man who'd faced his demons and walked away whole. Jenny Harper leaned into the camera, a warm grin lighting her face. There you have it, y'all, Jack Carter's tale, from a busted-up kid to a man who found his way. It's all about change, those big wild leaps that shape us, whether we're ready or not. Ain't about magic or curses, just plain human grit and a chance to do better. What you think? Drop me a line below, love hearing from you. That's the end of story 2, folks. If you liked it, hit that subscribe button and share it round. Keeps me spinning these yarns for you. Thanks for hanging out, catch you in the next one.